Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, where stories of courage, survival, and unexpected bonds unfold in the vastness of space. In today's episode, we bring you the tale of Cel, a once defective creation of the Dominion, now fighting for her freedom, and Morgan, the man who chose to help her when no one else would. Together, they face the relentless might of the Dominion, battling not only their pasts but also the fate they've been forced into. This is the story of resilience, defiance, and the power of choice. Kuro's dock, a forgotten relic floating in the vast emptiness of space, was a silent monument to an age long past. It drifted, unbothered by the chaos of the galaxy, far beyond the reach of civilization's grasp. The station's aging frame, rusted and weathered, barely clung to its purpose, merely a pit stop for ships that passed through the Rust Belt, a place where little was expected and even less was provided. The cold void surrounding it stretched endlessly, the stars above twinkling faintly, like forgotten memories in the vast tapestry of night. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of isolation. As Morgan sat in the cockpit of the Last Word, his boots rested lazily on the worn console, chewing on the end of a carbon wire. His ship, an old, battered vessel, had seen more years than it had any right to. He glanced idly at the telemetry feed on his screen, waiting for an auction to load. The comm was almost soothing until it wasn't. A hum, low and menacing, sliced through the stillness. The very air around him seemed to vibrate, a feeling in the bones, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. In the distance, a shape cut through the stars, sharp and angular unlike anything he had seen before. The hum grew louder, resonating through the last word, a steady pulse like a distant heartbeat. Morgan's breath hitched. The ship came into view, slicing through the void with an unmistakable precision. It was sleek, designed not for beauty, but for function. Every angle screamed efficiency. The sleek metal gleamed coldly in the low light, its surface unmarred by the rust and wear of the world it had landed in. A Dominion vessel, unmistakable in its purpose and design. Morgan's stomach tightened as he watched it descend, its black silhouette cutting across the purple-hued sky, its form as menacing as a blade in the dark. It hovered above the landing pad, casting an ominous shadow over the dust-covered ground below. Morgan didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed locked on the telemetry screen, which flickered with data. A cold shiver ran down his spine as it flashed the ship's designation, Diplomatic Envoy. He frowned. Diplomats didn't come out here. Not to the Rust Belt. Not to him. He stood, his movements deliberate, his hand brushing the grip of the revolver he kept duct-taped beneath the navigation panel. His instincts screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a harbinger of bad things to come. The hiss of the airlock echoed through the cold silence as the Dominion emissary emerged. The moment he stepped out of the ship, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air thick with the weight of authority. His armor was obsidian, cold silver trimming glinting under the dim lights of the station. It was a symbol of Dominion power, sleek and intimidating, forged for one purpose only, to instill fear and demand obedience. The emissary's face remained hidden beneath the dark, reflective visor of his helmet, his expression unreadable, a mere silhouette of silent dominance. Behind him floated a hover sled, carrying a stasis pod. It was sleek, pristine in its design, yet its surface was marred by scars. The pod's corners were chipped, its surfaces scorched, and the Dominion crest on its side was scratched as if someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to remove it. The symbol of power, now defaced. The sight struck Morgan with a deep unease. What was inside that pod? The emissary's voice broke through the quiet, his tone sharp as a knife. "Morgan," he said, his gaze fixed on the man standing before him, "you rendered unsanctioned assistance to a Dominion official 6 cycles ago. You saved a High Counselor's transport. We have not forgotten." Morgan stood still, arms folded, his eyes narrowing. He had no desire for gratitude, no need for rewards. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. The emissary gave a small, indifferent nod, as if to confirm Morgan's compliance. He gestured toward the sled, and it moved, shifting slightly to reveal the woman inside the pod. Cel. Suspended in a deep, thick sedation fluid, her body twitched sporadically, erratically, like a puppet with frayed strings. Her skin, a dusky violet, seemed almost alien in its richness, a color unlike anything Morgan had ever seen. Biomechanical plating covered her arms and legs, delicate yet shattered, like something both fragile and indestructible. Sparks of erratic energy danced across her form, a result of neural pathways misfiring, damaged beyond repair. Her long black hair floated in the fluid, drifting like seaweed caught in amber. "This is Cel," the emissary continued, his voice colder now. "Deemed defective. Her service is terminated. Dominion law mandates that failed assets be recycled, but exceptions are made for those who render unusual service. You may take her, dispose of her, use her, entertain yourself, whatever pleases you." Morgan's chest tightened, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You're giving me a person?" "No," the emissary said flatly. "A thing." Morgan's eyes remained fixed on Cel inside the stasis pod, the cold, almost ghostly light of the room casting strange shadows on her broken form. She was suspended in the thick, amber liquid, her body barely moving, a mere shell of what she once might have been. Her skin, a deep, dusky violet, was still beautiful despite the damage, the result of cruel, unfeeling hands. Each jagged line in her biomechanical plating told a silent story of suffering, of painful surgeries designed to force her into something she wasn't. The scars across her right temple seemed to glimmer in the dim light, a stark reminder that this wasn't a battlefield wound, but something much more insidious, surgical, precise, and coldly calculated. They had done this to her. The Dominion had turned her into nothing more than a disposable tool, a weapon to be discarded when it no longer served their purpose. Morgan's hand hovered just above the emergency override controls. His mind raced. He could tear her apart. He could sell the cybernetic parts, the high-end neural relays, the armor. The parts could fetch a fortune in the right circles. He could wash his hands of the entire thing, get some credits, and never look back. The thought whispered to him like a shadow, but it left a bitter taste on his tongue. The flickering memory of his sister Kira's blood, spilling freely across the cold docking bay floor, crept into his mind. He saw the Dominion patrols walk past her lifeless body, their indifferent gazes not even sparing a second to acknowledge her death. They had treated her like nothing more than discarded debris. She was just another casualty, another broken piece of the war machine. He clenched his jaw, the taste of anger rising in his chest. He was not that man anymore. Not since Kira died. He couldn't turn away again. Not like this. With a decisive motion, Morgan punched in the override code. The pod emitted a low, almost mournful hiss as the gel began to drain, leaving Cel's frail form exposed to the cold air. The pod's doors creaked open, releasing a faint, metallic smell, and Cel's body dropped gently onto the soft padded surface beneath her. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, as if her body itself didn't know how to function after being torn apart and put back together. She didn't stir. Morgan stood over her, his heart pounding. He had done it. He had saved her. The silence in the room stretched endlessly as Cel lay motionless on the padded surface. Her body twitched occasionally, the erratic movements a sign of the disordered neural pulses racing through her system. The soft hum of the ship's life support systems filled the air, but there was no other sound, no beeping monitors, no buzzing machines, no authoritative commands flooding her mind. It was as if the very atmosphere in the room was different. It wasn't the cold, clinical silence she had known for so long. It wasn't the sterile buzz of Dominion machinery dictating her every move. No. This was different. Her skin was cold to the touch, slightly tacky from the cryo-fluid she had been suspended in. The faint scent of the cooling gel lingered in the air around her, but there was something else too, something organic, human, real. Cel's eyes fluttered open, barely able to focus, as she took in her surroundings. The low light of the room blurred around her, and her vision swam with confusion. She didn't know where she was, but there was one thing she did know: it wasn't Dominion. It wasn't their cold, rigid, controlled world. The room around her was cramped, made of steel and metal, but it didn't feel oppressive. There was no stark, fluorescent lighting, no looming presence of the Dominion's watchful eyes. The walls, scarred from years of use, spoke of isolation, but also of freedom. She could feel it in the air, the stillness that was somehow different. Was she free? Her breathing became slightly less erratic as she focused on the sensation of warmth spreading through her. It was the warmth of life, something she hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't the cold, mechanical warmth of the Dominion's medical bays, sterilized to perfection and filled with the hum of machines. No, this was something real. Something that wasn't meant to be controlled. Something that pulsed with the echo of human life. Morgan's presence near her caught her attention. He was sitting beside her, his face soft with a quiet concern. He offered her a cup of water, his voice rough but gentle. "You're safe," he said, the words thick with the weight of truth. Safe. The word didn't make sense at first, like a foreign language. She blinked, trying to make sense of it. She wasn't a thing to be kept safe. She was a weapon, a tool, something that was supposed to fight and obey. She didn't belong in a world of safety. She had never known it. Her hand twitched slightly, the fingers stiff and uncooperative, but she reached for the cup with an instinctual movement. Her grip was weak, trembling, but she held it. The water was room temperature, foreign, and simple. She lifted it to her lips and drank slowly, feeling the liquid slide down her throat, quenching the dry, painful ache inside. It wasn't nutrient gel or synthetic hydration. It was just water. Just water. She looked at Morgan, her mind still struggling to process everything. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice hoarse, unrecognizable to herself. Morgan's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something more in his eyes than just concern. There was something else. Compassion. "You're safe," he repeated, as though that was enough to explain everything. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. She was safe. Safe. That word, foreign and strange, began to settle in her chest. Could it be real? Was this what freedom felt like? She didn't know. She didn't know anything. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. Cel's voice was barely a whisper, fragile, as if her very words were an effort. Her lips trembled as she formed them, each breath shallow, struggling against the weight of the pain and confusion still clouding her mind. "Who are you?" she rasped, her words escaping like dust from an ancient book, fragile and worn, as though the question itself had been buried in her subconscious for far too long. Morgan stood still, the weight of her gaze forcing him to pause, as though her eyes, now open and searching, had become an anchor in the otherwise cold emptiness of space. He had no answer prepared, no rehearsed response to the question that seemed to carry the burden of all that had happened to her. He hesitated. His hand hovered, almost instinctively, above the water cup, but then he set it aside gently, the act deliberate, almost reverent. "Morgan," he finally said, his voice low and soft, "just Morgan." There was no grandeur in his name. No titles, no accolades. Just a man, sitting beside her, trying to bridge the vast distance between their worlds. Cel's gaze locked with his, her violet eyes dull with the haze of disorientation, yet something stirred in them. For the first time, something in his eyes caught her attention. Compassion. It wasn't a word she was familiar with. She had seen control, command, manipulation in the cold faces of Dominion officers. She had seen the mechanical, emotionless eyes of those who held her captive for years. But Morgan's eyes were different. There was no cruelty there, no hidden agenda. His gaze was raw, unguarded, and it startled her, like a spark catching fire. Her hand trembled slightly as it reached for the cup again, but she didn't take it right away. She stared at it, unsure, trying to comprehend the gesture. "Safe," she repeated softly to herself, the word unfamiliar in her mouth, foreign. In her mind, safety had always been a trap. A tool to weaken. It wasn't a promise, it wasn't survival. It was an illusion. The Dominion had never offered her safety, only the cold certainty of her place as a tool. A weapon. Morgan, sensing her hesitation, spoke again, his voice quieter now, as if this were a secret he needed to share with her, one she would understand. "You're not a tool," he said, each word slow, deliberate. "You don't belong to anyone." The words hung in the air, like a forgotten song drifting through an empty room. For a moment, Cel simply blinked, her mind processing the truth in those simple words. The weight of them pushed against the walls of her broken consciousness. She had always been something to be used, to be thrown away. But now, Morgan's words were different. They weren't empty. They didn't echo in the same hollow way the Dominions had. She was not just another broken asset. She wasn't a weapon. For the first time in her existence, she felt a ripple of something like freedom, like she could breathe again. And it terrified her. She took the cup this time, her hand shaking as she lifted it to her lips. The water was warm, almost ordinary. But it wasn't a nutrient blend, wasn't something created to fuel her like a machine. It was real. She drank slowly, savoring the simple act of it. As the cool liquid trickled down her throat, something inside her shifted, just a little. The layers of her disconnection from herself, from humanity, began to loosen, if only for a moment. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken words. Cel leaned back against the wall, her body aching, the joints of her cybernetic limbs protesting each shift. She closed her eyes slowly, as if bracing herself to venture back into the dark places of her past, a place she had kept buried deep within her. Her breath, slow and shaky, matched the rhythm of her heartbeat, uneven and strained. The walls around her seemed to close in, but she didn't push them away. She needed to speak, needed to get the words out before they suffocated her again. She let her head fall back slightly against the cold, hard surface of the wall, feeling the weight of her memories press against her mind. She began softly, as though testing the waters of her voice, each word measured, like stones being laid in a long-forgotten path. I was made to serve, to fight. Her voice trailed off, a slight shudder running through her. She could still remember the sterile, emotionless rooms, the constant hum of machines that never stopped, that never let her rest. I wasn't meant to think. I wasn't meant to feel. I was just a weapon. The memories surged forward like waves, overwhelming her. They reprogrammed me, she whispered, her voice strained with the weight of the truth. They erased me, over and over. Every time I felt something, they scrubbed it out. Her hands twitched, and she clenched them into fists, her fingers digging into the fabric of her suit. But sometimes, the memories didn't go away. They kept coming back. They wanted me to forget who I was. To become nothing but a soldier. A tool. She paused, her body trembling as the weight of those years pressed on her chest. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget. Morgan stayed silent, his eyes never leaving her. His mind, racing through his own past, felt the weight of her words in his bones. He could see the truth in them, even if it was something he never voiced aloud. The Dominion didn't just control bodies, they controlled minds, crushed spirits, and left nothing but broken shells in their wake. Morgan knew. He had felt that cold, suffocating grip of Dominion before he had seen it take everything from him. His sister. His home. His world. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, heavy with understanding. I know, he said quietly. I know what they do. I lost everything to them too. Cel's eyes flickered toward him, still clouded with confusion, but there was something else there now, something that wasn't just numbness. It was connection. Recognition. The memories weren't just hers to carry anymore. They were shared, broken pieces that could finally be healed together. Morgan gave a small, sad smile, his hands trembling as he reached out, not to touch, but to show her, silently, that she wasn't alone. Days bled into one another, the weight of time pressing down heavily on Cel. Her body, still fragile from the stasis, had yet to remember the motions of life. Every movement felt alien, as though her limbs no longer belonged to her. Each muscle was stiff, as if bound in place by invisible chains, unwilling to move without resistance. Her joints cracked and groaned as if complaining, each step a struggle against the years of forced stillness. She tried to stand, her feet unsteady beneath her, her legs trembling with the effort. The once smooth surface of the floor beneath her seemed uneven, shifting beneath her, like a distant memory of the battlefield she had once known. Every attempt felt like walking through thick, invisible fog. Her limbs, jerky and uncoordinated, fought her at every turn. The neural pathways in her body, twisted by years of malfunctioning programming, made each movement feel as if it came from a stranger's body. Cel's eyes burned with determination. She was not a machine. She wasn't an object to be discarded or rebuilt. She was still her. And though her body refused to cooperate, her mind had already begun to rebel against the rigid controls of the Dominion. She refused to fall. Morgan stood quietly, his presence in the room almost a shadow. He didn't rush her. He didn't offer pity, for he knew better. His gaze was steady, warm but unobtrusive, as he watched her struggle. There was no need to speak in the moments between each hesitant step. Cel already knew the truth he had to offer. One step at a time, he said quietly, his voice soft, yet carrying the weight of a promise. There was no hurry. She had time now. Time to heal. Time to reclaim herself. There came a day when Cel moved. At first, it was small, a slight shift in her stance, a tentative lifting of her foot. The floor beneath her seemed less foreign, less threatening, though still shaky. But she held herself up, her chest rising and falling with effort, her breath shallow, but determined. Then, with slow precision, She took one step. Then another. And another. Her body fought her every inch of the way, each motion a battle, a fierce contest between her mind and the broken, unwilling form she was trying to reclaim. The pain in her limbs was overwhelming. Every muscle screamed in protest, every nerve ending sent sharp, jagged signals through her body. It was as though her own body didn't want her to remember how to live. But she didn't stop. The determination in her eyes grew with each step. Each movement, though slow and labored, was a victory in itself. Cel felt something stir inside her, something that had been buried for so long, forgotten in the cold silence of the Dominion's laboratories. It was her. Not a soldier. Not a tool. Her. But as she reached for another step, the strain became too much. Her body trembled violently, and before she could stop it, her knees buckled, sending her crashing to the floor. Her breath caught in her chest, sharp and ragged as she gasped for air, the pain lancing through her limbs like fire. For a moment, all was still. The world around her blurred into a haze of exhaustion and defeat. Morgan didn't move at first. He stood a few steps away, watching her, giving her space, as if he knew that no help could be given except the kind of silent support that allowed her to find her own way. He could see the pain she was in, the struggle, but he also saw the strength that was there hidden beneath the surface, a fire not yet extinguished. "You're not broken," he said quietly, his voice low and soothing. The words hung in the air between them, a soft reassurance. "You're just unfinished." His words settled into her chest, finding their mark. She was unfinished, yes. But she was not beyond saving. Not beyond healing. And as the weight of those words lingered, Cel closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. She wasn't broken. She was still here. In the stillness, she could feel her body begin to calm, her breath steadying as the exhaustion began to fade. She wasn't done yet. The road ahead was long, and her body may not have fully remembered the path, but Cel wasn't giving up. Not this time. Not ever again. The days passed, and with each one, Cel grew stronger, though slowly, like the first flicker of light breaking through a long, oppressive darkness. Her steps became more confident, her limbs more controlled, as if her body was finally beginning to remember what it was like to be whole. The strange hum of her mechanical parts was still present, but with each passing day, the harsh discord seemed to lessen. Now, there was a quiet rhythm in her movements, a pulse that mimicked the quiet beat of the heart she had thought lost forever. In parallel, something else was growing stronger, something that had remained dormant for so long, perhaps even buried beneath the rubble of both their souls: trust. Morgan watched her from across the room, his gaze following the subtle changes in her expression, the way she moved. He didn't rush her. There was no hurry anymore. He had no expectation. She was learning, healing at her own pace, in her own time. And when she met his gaze, he could see the tentative understanding between them. It wasn't just the silence anymore, it was the unspoken knowledge that, perhaps for the first time in their lives, they weren't alone. One evening, while the ship hummed softly with the sounds of its routine systems, Morgan and Cel sat together. The dim light cast long shadows on the walls, their quiet voices filling the space between them. "I lost my sister," Morgan said quietly, his voice a low murmur. His eyes never left the console in front of him, though the confession seemed to rip through him. "The Dominion took everything from me. They killed her. Coldly, without a thought, as if she were nothing." Cel's eyes were distant for a moment, the weight of his words sinking into her like stones dropped into still water. She had seen the same coldness in their eyes. She had felt it herself, the void that the Dominion left behind, hollowing out any sense of self. She could understand the pain, the loss, the sharp sting of being stripped of everything you held dear. The quiet tension between them began to soften, melting away like snow under a warm sun. Cel didn't need to speak. Her gaze, steady and knowing, met his. She didn't offer sympathy, nor did she need it. She offered something much deeper, the understanding that they had both been shattered in similar ways, and in that shared silence, something was finally beginning to bind them together. Morgan turned to her, his voice more resolute now. "I didn't help you to get anything back. I didn't help you for a reward. I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of someone else suffering like I did. Like we both have. No one deserves that." Cel nodded slowly, the words settling over her like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words weren't quite there yet. So, she said nothing. Instead, she reached out slowly, the trembling fingers of her left hand brushing against the back of his. It wasn't much, but it was a promise, a fragile one, born from the same understanding. Morgan smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I won't let them decide your story. Not while I'm breathing." And with those words, Cel finally believed it. Her story wasn't over. Not yet. Maybe it never would be. The calm was shattered by the shrill tone of the proximity alarm. The sharp, biting sound cut through the quiet hum of the ship, sending a wave of tension through the air. Morgan's fingers froze on the control panel, his eyes snapping to the screen as the data flashed across it. He cursed under his breath. He had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it still made his chest tighten. A Dominion reconnaissance drone had found them. It wasn't a surprise. The Dominion never gave up, never let anything slip from their grasp. The red glyphs on the screen flashed a steady rhythm, like the beat of an unrelenting heart. The drone's scan was faint, but it had found them, its sensors locking onto the last word's signature. It had taken only one small mistake, one slip through the cracks, and now they were marked. "We have to leave," Morgan said, his voice sharp, with a sense of urgency that laced every syllable. His fingers danced across the controls, but the ship was already in motion. The coordinates for an escape route, a place to hide, were ready. They had to go. The longer they stayed, the more likely it was that Dominion reinforcements would arrive. His heart pounded, knowing that if they stayed any longer, the consequences would be dire. But Cel didn't move. Her gaze was unwavering as she stared at the flashing alarms, the growing threat that loomed outside. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look afraid. Instead, her eyes burned with something else. Determination. A fierce fire that had been rekindled in her after so long. "No," Cel said, her voice steady, colder than the still air of the ship. "We face them. Now." Her words were simple, but they were final. There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt in her eyes. She had been running her entire life. She wasn't going to run anymore. Morgan's gaze softened as he turned to her, his hand hovering over the ship's controls. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a mixture of admiration and respect, but also something else, fear, perhaps, for what would happen if she was caught again. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice soft but laden with the weight of the situation. He had already seen too much destruction. He had already lost too much. But Cel was different. She had already been broken. He couldn't bear the thought of her being shattered again. "I'm sure," Cel replied, her voice like steel. She stepped forward, moving toward the cockpit controls with the resolve of someone who had already made their peace with the consequences. The Dominion wasn't just coming to capture her this time, they were coming to erase her. And she wouldn't let them. Together, they prepared for what would come. And as the ship's engines roared to life, ready to face whatever the Dominion would throw at them, they both knew there was no turning back. The hum of the ship's engines was drowned out by the sound of the proximity alarm blaring again. Cel stood by Morgan's side, her posture rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. The cold air inside the last word buzzed with energy, the sharp edge of anticipation biting into the stillness. Her cybernetic limbs, still stiff from the prolonged stillness of her captivity, trembled slightly, but her eyes, those deep, violet eyes, burned with an intensity that spoke of a long-forgotten resolve. She wasn't going to run anymore. As the Dominion drones closed in, their shapes gliding through the stars like predatory birds, Morgan moved swiftly to the control panel, his fingers flying over the buttons. The ship's defense systems activated with a low, throaty growl. Pulse turrets whirred to life, and the kinetic railgun hummed, its power surging through the ship's veins. But Cel knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be enough. The Dominion was relentless, and their machines were far more advanced than anything they could offer. Morgan shot her a glance, his jaw tight with determination. "You think they'll back down?" His voice was laced with doubt, though his eyes never wavered from the screen. The drones were closing in fast, their silent, almost ominous presence a reminder of the cold grip the Dominion had on everything. Cel's breath was steady as she took her place beside him. Her hands hovered over the controls, ready to engage. Her mind was already calculating, already anticipating the movements of the drones, but there was something deeper in her, something fierce and untamed. She didn't need to be a weapon anymore. She had something they didn't: choice. "Not unless we make them," she said, her voice low and filled with a quiet defiance. The words seemed to hang in the air, a challenge to the universe itself. The threat of the Dominion no longer seemed as large as it once had. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for something far more precious: freedom. The battle was nothing like Cel had ever experienced before. The drones came at them in waves, their sleek forms cutting through the vastness of space with the cold efficiency of a machine built for one purpose: to destroy. They unleashed their weapons without hesitation, plasma fire lighting up the void, illuminating the dark expanse of space with each powerful shot. The last word rocked violently under the impact, but Morgan held steady, maneuvering the ship with precision, avoiding the worst of the attacks. Beside him, Cel was a force to be reckoned with. Her limbs, though still stiff from disuse, moved with a fluidity that felt almost unnatural. She wasn't the machine they had designed her to be. She was something more. With every movement, with every calculated strike, she drew on her own power, the power she had rediscovered deep within herself. It was raw, untamed, and every bit as dangerous as the Dominion had feared. She activated the ship's defense systems with a flick of her hand, overriding them with the ease of someone who had been born to control such technology. The pulse turrets fired with deadly accuracy, disintegrating the drones one by one. Her eyes glowed faintly with the strain of the effort, but there was no hesitation. She wasn't going to let them take control of her again. Morgan glanced at her as she worked, a quiet awe in his eyes. She was stronger than he had ever imagined. Not just in body, but in spirit. The Dominion had tried to break her, to erase her very soul. But here, now, she was alive, truly alive. And nothing, not even the Dominion's coldest machines, could take that from her. The final drone crumpled into the dark void of space, its sleek form twisted and destroyed by the force of Cel's power. The battle was over. For a moment, the silence was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems as they returned to normal. Cel stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the effort, but her expression was calm. There was no fear in her eyes now, no trace of the haunted, broken woman she had once been. Morgan sat back in his seat, exhaling deeply. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Cel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out into the vast, empty space before them. The Dominion had been pushed back, at least for now, but it wasn't the victory that had her heart pounding in her chest. It was the knowledge that, for the first time in her life, she was truly free. No longer controlled by the cold, mechanical grip of the Dominion, no longer a weapon in their endless war. She turned to Morgan, her expression softening, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. "For the first time," she said, her voice a whisper, "I know what it means to be alive." And together, they took their first steps into a new world, a world where they could choose their own fate, where they could forge their own future. The stars above were still cold and indifferent, but for the first time, they weren't alone under them. They had each other, and they had freedom. And that was enough. Cel had been reborn. And nothing would ever control her again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey through the stars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who love stories of courage and the fight for freedom. Stay tuned for more thrilling adventures in the galaxy, where every story is a battle between fate and the will to choose. Until next time, may the stars guide you.